Hey, this is Surfline Director of Forecasting Mark Willis. Alongside me, I've got lead forecaster Kurt Corte. We're here out of our office on the Outer Banks where we are monitoring very dangerous Category 4 Hurricane Florence, located at roughly 900 miles east-southeast of Cape Fear as of 11 a.m. on Tuesday, September the 11th. We're going to get a bit into the details with Florence in a minute, but first, let's take another live look into swell and surf conditions up and down the East Coast.
Yeah, Mark, let's go ahead and start down south in Florida, and a little bit of fun east to east southeast swell in the water down there. Buoys typically running in the 2 to 3 foot range, 10 to 12 seconds off a mix of swells. And that's producing pretty widespread surf in the waist to chest high zone for central and northern Florida. Even some bigger sets in central Florida and those typical standouts up in North Florida like New Smyrna Beach. Further south, we got a report from Jonathan Warren that surf along the northern parts of the Treasure Coast, smaller than that in the Nita Waist High Zone, and even smaller as you get down into the Bahamas shadow there. Winds have come light on shore, but still pretty fun conditions out there, all things considered. And that actually looks like one of the potentially better spots as we head later in the week. It looks like a pretty solid increase in swell for Florida as we head into the middle and especially the second half of the week.
So definitely check out the regional forecast for Florida. It seems like the models are starting to get a better handle on things. So you might see a couple little changes up, especially as it relates to surf quality with today's full update by Mike Watson down in Melbourne Beach, Florida. Working our way up the coast into South Carolina, looking at Cherry Grove Pier and Myrtle Beach. And the buoys offshore aren't really that much different from what they are off of Florida, but quite a bit of difference here as it relates to surf sizes. As you mentioned yesterday in our update, the bathymetry there acts kind of like a sponge. It likes to absorb a lot of that longer period energy, kind of zaps it out like you mentioned yesterday. And we're seeing that here at Cherry Grove Pier and Myrtle Beach. The surf is generally knee to waist high at best on the falling tide this afternoon. We're working our way up into Carolina Beach, and Myrtle Beach is under the gun, but Carolina Beach is as well. It looks like that zone roughly between the northern half of the coast of South Carolina through about Cape Lookout is really under the gun with the latest National Hurricane Center updates and some of the latest models. But Carolina Beach also has a little surf, generally waist to stomach high. And Katie Spagnolo put out the report this morning and was calling it fair, although winds have recently trended a little bit more onshore.
Yes, that's another spot that's somewhat temperamental when it comes to tide as well. It's interesting to look at the differences between Carolina Beach and even Wrightsville Beach, which is not that far away, obviously separated by Masonboro Island. But you have, it seems like a lot of times the mid and even higher tides do a little bit better in Carolina Beach, and typically lower tides up in Wrightsville. But as you mentioned, surf generally need a waist high or so. Some bigger sets still coming through, but some tidal influences there and those onshore winds, so conditions have deteriorated a little bit more since this morning. We've also seen a little bit of onshore wind develop up here. Again, you mentioned we're on the Outer Banks. Some fun surf up here, though, and actually it's pretty interesting to note we're seeing a couple different swells out there. So we have a little bit of Florence swell that's showing in around the 3.5 foot range or so at 10 to 11, 12 seconds on our area buoys, and also some lingering east-northeast swell. That's courtesy of some winds that occurred off the mid-Atlantic coastline over the past couple of days, unrelated to, unrelated or not, not completely tied in, I guess, with what's going on with Florence. Of course, the front and the high pressure up there is going to impact the track of Florence, but totally different fetch, totally different swell that we experienced here on the Outer Banks. And really, it was kind of interesting to hear people talk about it because everyone was saying that they thought it was the Florence swell showing bigger and stronger than what was predicted, but that was totally not the case. It was actually a northeast to east-northeast swell, and you could really tell with the surf quality here how peaky it was with the mix of directions and periods. Some spots were almost too wedged up, so you had to do some searching around, but there were some fun waves still in the head high zone or so earlier today here on the Outer Banks.
And the word combo swell isn't a very common term here on the East Coast, at least when you compare it to the West Coast, where they talk about that all the time. But we definitely had a combo situation over the last few days. Working our way up the coast to Virginia Beach, also some rideable waves here. Surf a little bit smaller there. It's leveled off a bit as some of that wind swell you were talking about has dropped off a little bit, but still waist occasional chest high. Looks a little soft at First Street, and the winds have come on shore a little bit stronger than this morning, so semi-bumpy overall. And of course, the forecast for this zone actually looks like today could be the last opportunity to surf, at least if you want good quality waves, because things are going to go downhill with respect to wind, although we will get more size.
Yes, it's definitely the limit next to the pie as far as the size is concerned. We saw Hurricane Florence rapidly intensify yesterday into a Category 4 hurricane. That swell is not currently on our beaches. It's going to be filtering in here as we head into Wednesday and especially Thursday as the system approaches. So we're looking for a pretty substantial increase in wave heights. But as you mentioned, conditions are going to deteriorate. I do think there could be a short little window, especially up into Virginia Beach during the morning on Wednesday before conditions really deteriorate with those increasing onshore winds.
And working our way up the coast, looking at Manasquan Inlet right now, where the surf actually looks pretty fun. Quite a few people out in the water. There's a little fog out, and actually the majority of the swell here, I think, is all from that front. And there's still some lingering winds south of the Canadian Maritimes that are kind of enhancing 8 to 11 second energy as some of that longer period east-southeast to southeast swell from Florence mixes in, and you can see that in the spectral wave data. But yeah, back to Manasquan surf. Winds look pretty light. Surf looks waist to head high. Definitely some head high sets, and overall light on shore and looking pretty fun.
Yeah, but we saw a warm front lift through there, and that kind of allowed the winds to lighten up a little bit today. Conditions have gradually improved as some of the lingering wind swell has dropped out. It's gotten a little more organized, and it's very similar to what we're seeing in western Long Island. We saw a short period of pretty light offshore winds this morning, some fog lingering around early in the day, but fun waves. And again, the waist, chest, even head high zone, some of the better breaks there, and pretty fun conditions really after a couple days of side shore winds.
And I'm pulling up the forecast for Long Island right now, and it looks like they will have a couple of opportunities, especially in the mornings over the next couple of days, and you're on that forecast, so maybe you can break it down a little bit for us better than I can.
Yeah, so a couple different factors that we're looking at. The lingering wind swell that's been in the water the past few days and is providing surf force today is going to gradually trend down as we head into Wednesday and especially the back half of the week. As that happens, we do expect more longer period east-southeast becoming more southeast and then eventually south swell from Florence to filter in later Wednesday, but especially Thursday, and then we'll start to trail down some Friday and into the weekend as Florence eventually makes landfall and that fetch kind of shuts down. Condition-wise, looking at the mornings, looking at the best winds. However, we do have a high tide right around mid-morning. It's going to slow down some breaks. If I was in Long Island, I was thinking about when to surf, I would try to get out there right at dawn and get the incoming push before it gets too deep, and that's when the winds look the most favorable on Wednesday and even into Thursday morning.
And of course, if you want Kurt's full update, again, follow those links on Surfline to the regional forecast product and also the premium analysis where Kurt breaks everything down. Last but not least, we're going to go north of Cape Cod into the Gulf of Maine. They also have some surf, generally in that chest to head high zone. And that's predominantly east-southeast to southeast wind swell. There's a little bit of southeast swell from Florence also mixing in. The conditions don't look great this afternoon because of the higher tide, at least at the wall, but there are still some rideable waves, and the winds overall don't look too terrible either.
Yes, I think that's one of the things I mentioned in the forecast is this morning the winds were still pretty dicey, and there's still a lot of that kind of lingering short period jumble that you see after a wind swell event when the winds finally slacken off. And now that some of that's dropped out, overall organization of the surf has improved. The form and the quality of the waves are getting a little bit better. And I suspect here of the rest of the day that should continue. So there should be a trend towards some fun waves here towards the middle and second half of the day.
So let's wrap things up by taking a look at Hurricane Florence. So as of 11 a.m., Florence was located about 905 miles east-southeast of Cape Fear, North Carolina, Category 4 storm with winds of 130 mile per hour or 115 knots moving west-northwest. And it's a very dangerous situation for the southeast coast. Most of the southeast coastline from, I think, at Edisto, South Carolina to the Virginia, North Carolina border is under a hurricane watch right now. That same area is also under a storm surge watch, plus the addition of the Albemarle and Pamlico Sound. So a very dangerous situation, and it looks like Florence is going to be in a favorable environment for strengthening, at least right up until it gets really close to the southeast coast.
Yes, and temporarily strengthened up to 140 miles an hour yesterday, but then we had something what we call an eye replacement cycle, where the real interior part of the storm kind of breaks down and then reforms. And obviously there wasn't significant weakening because it's down to 130 knots or 130 miles an hour now, but it does look like strengthening is expected over the next 12 to 24 hours. And I think the National Hurricane Center's latest forecast from 11 a.m. brings it up to 150 miles an hour within the next 24 hours.
And as we mentioned earlier, one of the big changes that we just saw was that the latest GFS model, which is the USA main weather model, has trended more towards the European model, which has been south for several runs now towards the Cape Fear to kind of Cape Lookout zone. And the GFS has been hanging this storm out near Cape Hatteras and kind of moving it slowly there, at least off and on, for the last several days. And that has shifted closer to the European model. And that's obviously, it's going to be interesting to see the 5 p.m. advisory from the National Hurricane Center. If they express more confidence in their products. I still think, obviously, there's room for some tweaks here and there, but it seems like things are starting to consolidate a little bit. That obviously makes the lives of the Hurricane Center easier and people as far as messaging, but a very dangerous situation for parts of the southeast coast. And our thoughts and prayers are definitely out to everyone impacted, and we're still not out of the woods here on the Outer Banks either.
No, certainly not. And that's why we have a hurricane watch in effect. We have mandatory evacuations that went into effect yesterday down on Hatteras Island and today up on the northern Outer Banks. It's also important to note that the GFS model is the model that drives a lot of the Swell model guidance that you see out there, including Lola. I know, with the storm with the GFS expecting it to kind of hang around the Outer Banks, that had impacts for us locally, but then also parts up and down the East Coast on how much swell would linger later in the weekend, especially over the weekend. Now that we're starting to see the things can kind of consolidate here in a little bit better consensus, I expect to see, obviously the wave model guidance will change a little bit compared to what we've seen recently because of those changes with the GFS model. That's going to be reflected in some of the wave model guidance. I've already incorporated that information into my forecast that I updated yesterday and will continue to do so today. But yes, definitely interesting that things have kind of come together a little bit more. And I know the Hurricane Center is probably pretty stressful over the past couple of days.
So a critical update coming up later today, not only from Kurt Corte and our team of meteorologists that are updating our regional forecasts and premium analysis products, but obviously a pretty critical forecast package for the Hurricane Center and all the local weather service offices up and down the southeast coast that have to put out their warning messages. Once again, I'm Surfline Director of Forecasting Mark Willis with lead forecaster Kurt Corte. Stay safe, everyone. Our thoughts and prayers are with everyone that looks to be impacted by Hurricane Florence.